Good morning. Hey there. Good morning. All right, we got our online crew joining as we speak. Great to see you all this morning here with us, and hope you guys enjoyed the breakfast. There is also coffee. Yeah, so everyone sees the coffee and the tea in the other room. Okay, let's get started. This is going to be a lot of fun. All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Kabbalah Cafe. So this is our weekly look at the deeper teachings of Judaism. And in my opinion, this is the best way to get the week started. What better way to get the week started than with some Jewish spiritual conversation? So today's topic is the origin of language. Now, I'm not an expert on the origin of language. I have not done a lot of research. I've not done a lot of scientific exploration. But what I do have is access to the internet. And thus, I'm an expert. So what I did was I looked up what Wikipedia has to say about the origin of language and other websites about the origin of language. And it's interesting because I found at least a dozen or two different theories as to the origin of language. And some of these theories are very colorful in what the theories are called. And I don't remember all the names, but I'll tell you some of the theories. Some of the theories of the origin of language include that human beings initially mimicked the sound that other creatures made, like other animals and birds. I think we're still doing that. We call that tweeting. Anyway, whatever. But it's like human beings mimicked language that other creatures were doing, and then that evolved. Another theory has it that human beings began the origins that human beings initially mimic the sounds of not the animals or birds, but the sounds of nature itself, like the sounds of rivers, and waterfalls, and the wind and the trees. You ever hear a tree? Neither have I. But anyway, the sound of nature itself. Others say that it was, just an evolutionary process where people began to. I think I saw one that there was music, and then people were kind of imitating the music. I don't know where the origin of music is. That would be another class or another conversation. Then that evolved into language. Now, there are many, many, many theories and sub-theories within the theories. But there's a very interesting take on this in Judaism. And I wish to share with you the kind of the origin story of language as understood in classic Jewish thought. But really today, and I'll just tell you straight at the top, what we're trying to accomplish is we're going to try to figure out where in the soul does language come from. Because every ability that we have comes from a power within the soul. Our ability to hear is a soul power, to see is a soul power, and to think is a soul power, to speak is also a power of the soul. So we're going to explore not only historically, where does language come from, but also internally, where does the power of language come from? And as we'll see today, the origins will be very surprising, and the upshot or the result of that, or the consequence of where language comes from, as we'll see today, is extremely, extremely powerful. But first, let's share the Jewish idea. And by the way, this is also an idea that you find in other sources, this general idea that language originates with some sort of divine revelation. Like God taught people language, and God God kind of formulates language, and then people pick up on that. That's one theory amongst the many. And another one is that God gave the building blocks of language, and then human beings kind of ran with that and developed it further. But let's talk about what it says in Jewish sources. So the Torah tells us at the beginning of Bereshit, beginning of Genesis, says right at the beginning, it says Adam named all the animals, which seems to indicate that Adam had some sort of way of language communication, or even labeling something is a form of language, right? It's a form of language identification. Now, what was the language that Adam used? According to our tradition, Adam used the original Holy Tongue, which is Hebrew. Not necessarily modern Hebrew. That's a little bit of a variation of ancient Hebrew, but he was speaking the original ancient Hebrew. In fact, the Torah tells us at the end of the second Torah portion in the Bible, which is the Torah portion of Noach. Of course, the portion of Noach deals primarily with the flood, the great flood that destroys humanity, and of course Noah and the ark. Sounds like a band, Noah and the arks. Anyway, Noah and the animals in the ark, and they, that's how mankind or humankind survives, and also animal kind. But toward the end of that Torah portion, something interesting happens. There's the story, the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. Remember that story, the Tower of Babel? So the Torah tells us that people got together and they wanted to build a tower to the sky, a tower that reached all the way up to the sky. And it says that God was not happy with that tower. And so what he did was he mixed up the language of all the people, and automatically, the project fell apart, and people split off into different groups defined by their language, which again seems to imply, once again, that language begins in a unified space. There's one language for all, and it's only subsequently that language diversifies and kind of splits into multiple directions. This is the way we understand this based on the biblical narrative. There's one language for all, that language is Hebrew, and then the language diversifies. Now, how did Adam, or for that matter, how did humanity know Hebrew? The implication, again, from the biblical story, somehow, it was a divine gift, a divine revelation, as it were, that was bestowed upon humanity beginning with Adam and Eve, and then it was taught throughout the generations, subsequent generations. This language was taught until there had to be something, right? It had to start from somewhere, and so our tradition says that it started off in Hebrew, and then with the building of the Tower of Babel. So then that's when God was unhappy, and that's when God kind of split it up. By the way, parenthetically, what was God so triggered by this tower? What's wrong with the tower? What's wrong with a nice skyscraper, right? Seems like a nice thing to do. Nice project, keeps people busy, keeps them out of trouble. What's the problem? Many different theories amongst the commentators as to what the problem was. There's one very interesting commentary. This is, I forget who it is, but I know that it's dating back 300-400 years. He says what they were building is not necessarily a tower, but they were building a platform from which to launch something. That's what he says, to launch something into the heavens to then take on God. Sounds like a rocket. But this is like 300-400 years ago, before that was even, I guess people dreamed whatever they dreamed, but before that was a technological possibility. There are many other theories. People, some commentaries see it as, there's the general theory is that it's an affront to God, or they were trying to take on God. But there's another interesting angle on that, and that's what I wanted to share just very quickly right now, that this is post-flood, post-devastation. And in the Bible, the people that created the tower are quoted as saying, let's build this tower that reaches to the sky, and let's create for ourselves a name, right? Let's be famous. So one second. The world was just destroyed, and now you're rebuilding the world. You want to become famous? That's the whole. It's like humanity is in peril. It's not time to become famous. It's time to rebuild. Not build a tower, but rebuild society. It's kind of like a parallel might be, imagine, God forbid, a natural disaster. And imagine the news is covering like a hurricane or something. And you have one guy who's like mugging the camera. Like imagine some guy who's like, hey, I'm here. Look at me. I'm Of course we have that.
Presidents and governors.
I know. I'm just saying it's not so. I'm saying it's like not. It's a time when there's pain. Post devastation, there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of suffering. It's time to get down to work and heal the planet, heal society, etc. It's not time to think about yourself and your ego. Again, that's just a parenthetical insight. But be that as it may, in Judaism, language begins with Hebrew. And not only does it begin with Hebrew, you could listen, Tom, you're in two places at once over here. I'm seeing you here and there. It's pretty impressive. So the language begins in Hebrew. A quick note about Hebrew. This is very important. Hebrew, as I mentioned a moment ago, is called Lashon Kodesh, the holy tongue. One of the reasons for that is because unlike other languages that are, what's a good way to put it? Other languages would be, I'm thinking of the word random, but that's not necessarily like a scientific word. They are words and sounds that have been associated with a thing. So for example, cup, the word cup. Do the letters CUP somehow intimate? Do they somehow hint to the essence of this object? No, I don't think so. Cup, why cup? I don't know, we call it a cup. Huh?
There are things that sound like they are.
Yes. What is it? Onomatopoeia. Yeah. The words that sound like what's a good example of that?
English is not the original language.
Yeah.
German.
Right. But what's interesting is that most language in other languages, the letters and the words are, again, just we'll use this term, randomly associated with the item. Let's say a dog, right? If you have a dog or a cat, D-O-G, does that capture the spirit of the animal? I don't know. It's what we call it. Cat, whatever. It's just a thing. I grew up with a cat who loved to shed. It's like a long hair, gray cat, like light gray cat. Man, my jackets were always free. I look like a cat. Anyway, back to the story. So language is not necessarily precise. It is, we just associate this word with that thing. I mean, could cat be cup and cup be cat and the world would go on? Sure. Why not? If everyone called a cat a cup and a cup a cat, it's also okay. I don't think anything that would be that and that would be that. Life would be okay. However, and this is the important thing, the important distinction. When it comes to Hebrew, there's something completely else at play. When it comes to Hebrew, Hebrew is not a randomly associated language. Hebrew is actually what we might call an essential language, which means that it's the Hebrew that defines the item itself. And this is where you need a little bit of Kabbalah to really bring this point home. According to the mystics, well, I mean, it's according to our tradition, even before Kabbalah, it's God created the world through speech, through language. So the entirety of creation happens through letters, through language. And the mystics explain, they take this, they really delve into this idea that Hebrew letters are actually the channel through which divine energy flows into this world, which means that the Hebrew letters that compose the name of a thing, that thing is actually enlivened through its Hebrew letters that are associated with it. So, for example, the Arizal, the great Kabbalist, Rabbi Isaac Luria, he says that a rock, a stone in Hebrew, so we know it's called Even. Even, Aleph, Vet, Nun. That's the Hebrew word for stone is Even. He says the Hebrew letters of that word, 3 letters, Aleph, Vet, Nun, actually channel the energy of a stone. And it's, you know, it's kind of like computer code. So if you code software, so the letters, it's all coded in letters, language. If you switch out a letter, can completely change what the software, what the program looks like. Colors are coded in letters and numbers. The color that you see in software, if the screen looks blue or red, that's a color. That's a code. Change the letters of the code and you change the color. You can try this. There's websites where you can try this. You can get to coding, to practice coding and you can literally change images and change colors based on letters. And according to the mystics, which again, the Kabbalah predates modern computing and coding by thousands of years, but according to the mystics, this is how God creates the world. God codes, in essence. I'm using modern language for an old idea, but God, as it were, codes existence into existence. All of this is by divine code, and that is, and it's composed of Hebrew letters.
Can I add one thing?
Sure, absolutely.
Short. Last name is Short. He was really a scientist. He wasn't religious, but he started studying the Bible and the words. And he quantized everything. He gets into all these, what he calls coincidences. One thing he looks at is color. He takes the word in Hebrew for color, and he has explained that the different words used differently. Go through the words he picks. He then takes the gematria of those words in numerical value, those letters, and he compares them to the frequency of the light wave of each color. And it's almost a perfect match.
That's amazing. I want to repeat that just in case our online crew didn't hear that. So basically what Sam is saying is that there's a scientist, you said Israeli scientist, who took the gematria, the numerical value of the Hebrew word for various colors, and showed how it aligns with the frequencies of the light waves of those very colors.
It does it in a lot of things.
It's incredible. It's incredible. It's incredible. Dr. David is on with us here, Dr. David Lazan. And I know David shared a book several years ago that I think does some of that stuff, shows some of that, some of those types of connections along those lines, if not that specific one, but also along those lines. It's fascinating stuff. Hebrew is really the code language of existence, which is why, getting back to the second or third chapter of Genesis, when it says that Adam named all the animals, he gave all the animals their Hebrew names, the commentators wonder why we need to know that. Like, who cares? The point is that Adam was so attuned, he was so in tune with the frequency, with the spiritual energy of each and every animal, each and every existence on planet Earth, that he was able to look at it and say, I know your name. It's not that he gave it its name, it's that he was attuned to the Hebrew letters, that wavelength, as it were, that give rise to its being. Let me check the chat. I was going to mention the oscilloscope study producing the appearance of the letters spoken. Okay, nice. They're saying the shape of the letters have also significance. By the way, Kabbalah says that Hebrew letters are significant in their numerology. Every Hebrew letter is associated with a number, which is a powerful concept, as was just mentioned. Every Hebrew letter has a shape. Of course, every letter has a shape, but Hebrew letter shapes are very highly significant, and every Hebrew letter also has a name associated with it. So, for example, Aleph, the letter Aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph means something. It means ruler. Bet is like bayit, which means a home. So every letter not only is a symbol, but it has a definitive shape, obviously. It has a numerology and it has a name associated with it. Every letter is highly, highly significant. So to kind of bring back the conversation and kind of gather our thoughts. So what do we talk about today thus far? So number one, some important ideas. Number one, the idea that the origin of language in our tradition is with God, creating the world through language. And which language? Specifically the Hebrew language. God gives us the tools to understand that and also to co-create. And this is something that's very important. You may have heard this expression before many times, we are partners in creation, which means that God doesn't create a world that's finished and perfect. God creates a world that's imperfect by design in order for us to perfect it. That's where we have a mission. That's where we have a purpose. If God created perfection and all we were to do was just to enjoy it, well, we wouldn't have much significance and purpose in life. We would just be recipients of this incredible experience. It would be like a beach vacation, which, by the way, it's not a bad thing. It's a really good thing, but it's not very, I don't know. It doesn't feel like a lot of meaning and purpose. It's enjoyable. And that's, in fact, what the angels experience. The angels exist in heaven and they exist in a space that's perfect. We exist in a world that's imperfect, and our job is to fix it. So God not only creates through language, but gives us the tools to also create, which is why one of the most important mitzvot that we have is known as Shmirat HaLashon, which means being careful about how we speak. I'm sure you all are familiar with the phrase Lashon Hara, which is negative talk. It's such a big deal in Judaism. And by the way, I will contrast this with our society, with like with the norms of society. In society, it's not a big deal to talk about people, to talk about things, to spread gossip and rumors. In fact, if you check out at the grocery store, right, whether it's Books or Kroger, I think Trader Joe's has it, or Whole Foods. Yeah. Anyway, but if you check out in most, I don't know, the most popular grocery stores, you'll see that the shelves at checkout, right, those are lined with the latest gossip. It's an industry that's a billions of dollars industry to spread gossip. And in Judaism, the idea of being careful about how we speak and what we share is very, very important. In fact, our sages tell us that God put typically the senses that we have are covered with one layer. Like the eyes have one layer, the ear, I don't know, not really, but you can like theoretically close the ear. I'm not suggesting it, but like, yeah, theoretically. The nose, again, you can kind of close your nose if need be, but the mouth has two teeth. The tongue, to block the tongue, we have two guards, as it were, two layers of protection, the teeth and the lips. And so the Midrash says, God says, it's like the message for us. What we look at, we have to be careful. What we listen to is careful. What we smell, we have to be careful. But what we say, we have to be even the most careful. We have two shields in front of it just to show how high the stakes are. But getting back to the point, the big idea here is that language is precise, language is holy. And that's the divine origin of language. But today, as I said, we want to get to a different point, and that is, where does language come from? Within the soul, within the human experience, within the human body. So I want to contrast this morning, ideas versus language. Ideas versus language. Imagine someone who never learned how to speak. Imagine someone who never learned how to communicate. For whatever reason, they were brought up just imagine a scenario. A person does not have the ability to communicate. They can think, they can feel, but they can't communicate. They can't express. That will hold that person back, not only vis-a-vis others not understanding them, but vis-a-vis their own development of their ideas and emotions. Because the ability to share is so integral to our own development psychologically and emotionally. And this is the big Kabbalistic idea that we're going to explore today in our text that I'll pass around in just a moment. When you have an idea in your mind, it exists on some level of development. But when you take that idea, package it in your words, and then share it with someone else, that idea is greatly enhanced. If you take an emotion, a feeling, and you put it into words, and then you deliver it to someone else by speaking it to someone else, that emotion is greatly enhanced. And today we're going to get to the question of the paradox. How is that possible? How could it be that the idea in your head is enhanced when you put into words and share it with someone else? That seems to be like a degradation of the idea. The idea in the mind seems to be like the ultimate pristine space for ideas, whereas the idea in the spoken word seems to be a distortion or a mere, I don't know, glimmer of what the initial idea was. And yet, when we share ideas, we understand them better. When we share emotions, we feel them more powerful, even more than it existed in the heart. And the question is, how does that work? And so here is the mystical idea that we're going to learn inside. The idea is that when you have an idea in your head, it's your idea. When you have an emotion in your heart, it's your emotion. But when you put it into words and share it with someone else, what you're doing is transcending self. Because as long as the idea is still in your head and as long as the idea is in your head and the emotion is in your heart, it's locked into you and you alone, which makes it very particular and very individualistic. It's very individualized. It's your idea. It's your feeling. It's all about you. And that's a very particular experience. It's a very individualized experience. Whereas when you share that idea with someone else, you are bridging the gap between one world, you, and another world, the other person. So when you share that idea, you're breaking down the division between human beings. And that's something divine. Only a higher divine power has the ability to knock down the walls between one person and the next person. So again, when you have an idea in your head, that's fantastic and that's great. And it could be a genius idea. The problem is it's still stuck in your head. It's still very particular. It's still very unique to you. When you share it with someone else, you are touching upon an ability of your soul that can break down barriers between you and someone else. It's almost like, take, for example, the human soul. Everyone has a soul. And at the same time, and my soul is different than your soul. My soul is different than your soul is different than your soul. Everyone's soul is different. Everyone's soul is unique, on the one hand. On the other hand, every soul comes from God. So is it particular or is it universal? Are souls individual creatures, or are they universal points of universal forms of energy that are all one? The answer is both are true. There's a part of you that is unique and individualized, and there's a part of you that's also universal. There's a part of me that's me. There's a part of me that's also connected with you. Think about, for example, siblings in a family. Okay, so every sibling, every child, let's say a family with children, every child is their own child. And at the same time, every child has a connection with each other and with the parents. Like every child comes from the same parents. So there's some sort of larger connection between them. So they, at the same time that they are individual beings, they're also collective beings. The same is true with the family of humanity. Do we hit 9 billion? What did we just hit? How many people on this planet? 8 billion, 9 billion? Who's got the, yeah, something like that. So I think we just crossed some sort of threshold, or we're about to cross some sort of milestone of how many people on planet Earth. So Kabbalah says like this: each of the 8 or 9 billion people on Earth has their own soul, and yet everyone's individual soul is also connected with everyone else's soul. Because, explain?
Everybody has a fingerprint.
Right.
There are no two fingerprints alike as far as we know in the world. Even identical twins have slightly different fingerprints.
Right. So there's good. So the fingerprint example is everyone's fingerprints are unique on the one hand, and yet everyone's got fingerprints. So it's like the soul. Everyone's got a unique soul, and yet part of that idea is that the souls everyone has a soul, and then the big idea is that the souls are all connected in their source. They're all emanating from the same place, and therefore we're all on some level siblings, spiritual siblings, if not cousins or second cousins. But the point is that all souls are really connected.
Yeah,
and sure.
Oh, it's 8.
Oh, 8 billion. Okay.
Right. So you have an idea. You let somebody that's never even communicated. So you have a problem. You have to think with concepts. So first of all, the person, you got to figure out how can you develop concepts if you've never had any, like, I guess you can, a little baby does. So, but the question is, you have this concept in your head, this thing you want to, then you speak about it. In many cases, when you start speaking about it, you refine that, or you can change it, or realize maybe I'm wrong.
Exactly. Yes. That's what we're talking about today. When you start someone who's never had the opportunity to speak out the idea, that idea is so, and there's not a judgment, but it's relatively immature relative to the idea that has been spoken out and bounced with someone else and bantered about. The idea that's spoken is a much more developed and refined idea than the idea that's just stuck in the head. That's why language is not just a tool to benefit the other one so that they know what I'm thinking, but language is a tool to benefit myself. I gain when I communicate. Not just the other one knows what I'm thinking or how I'm feeling. It enhances my own experience. Mystically, why? Why is it so? Because ideas come from the part of the soul that's related to you. Ideas come from the part of the soul that's related to you. Language comes from the part of the soul that's related to everyone else. And that's a higher dimension. It's almost like the topmost part of the soul. If we could, soul is not spatial, so we can't really say top or bottom. But just indulge me for a moment because language is limited. How else are we going to talk about souls? The deepest part of the soul, the highest, as it were, part of the soul, is the part of the soul, is the element of the soul that's related to all other souls. Whereas the lower dimension of the soul is the part that's very particular to me or you. So again, the deepest part of the soul touches on everyone else's deepest part of the soul. That's kind of like the origin or the root in which they're all connected. Whereas as the soul kind of manifests in more of a particular way, that's the lower, and that's what's particular to me. So my idea, before I speak, my idea stems from the part of the soul that's mine. My language, which allows me to break down the barrier between me and you, my language stems from the part of the soul, the deepest part of the soul, that's related to all other souls. In other words, language itself, forget what I'm saying, doesn't matter what. The power of language itself, the ability to communicate, that ability comes from a part of the soul that's deeper than me. The part of my soul that's universal, not particular. So again, to summarize this idea, and I hope it's coming, these are pretty somewhat deep concepts in Kabbalah, so I will make sure that it's very clear. We each have a soul. The soul has, we'll just, for lack of a better term, we'll say the soul has two dimensions. There's the soul that's yours, and then there's the soul that is universal. And our soul has both elements. There's a part of our soul that's mine, and a part of my soul that's mine, part of my soul that's related to you. My ideas come from the part of the soul that's related to me. Language comes from the part of the soul that's related to you. That's why ideas are for me, and language is for me to share with everyone else. And that's why when we speak an idea to someone else, we've taken an idea from a very particular place and elevated to a universal place. And on that level, we can see things more clearly. By actually communicating with someone else, what happens on a mystical, on a soul level is we elevate the experience to a transcendent space that's higher than our own particularism. And that's why communication is so important. You know, they say that the key to relationships, you always hear this, the key to relationships is communication. The truth is the key to life is communication. And God, again, sets the template. God communicated and created through communication. The greatest things happen when we communicate. When we communicate, we share. It's healthy for the other to know how we're feeling or what we're thinking, but it's also healthier for us because it moves us out of a very closed space to an open space. And that open space expands everything. Our mind is expanded. Our emotions are expanded. Everything opens up when we share. Sharing is caring, but also sharing is very important to us as human beings, developing human beings. Okay. So, to point out, and this is kind of the paradoxical element here. You would think that taking an idea, brilliant idea that you have in your head, and putting it into language and then delivering it to someone else, you think that's a downgrade. I had this pure idea, and then I had to package it into imperfect language and then ship it off to someone else. I took something beautiful and I destroyed it, or I distorted it. And Kabbalah says, no. When you take a pristine idea and package it into imperfect words or limiting words, you have opened up the idea. What seems to be a downgrade is in fact an upgrade. This is one of the major tenets of Kabbalah. Sometimes, very often, what seems to be a descent, which is going down, is actually an elevation, it's going up. You think that the teacher thinks that they're stepping down to teach the child. As a great Talmudist once said, I learned a lot from my teachers, even more from my colleagues, and the most I learned is from my students. You think it's a step down. Oh, I'm wasting my time. I'm doing someone else a favor by teaching them. No, you're elevating your own consciousness. You're elevating yourself. What seems to be a downgrade is an upgrade. We're going to talk about this today also in the context of life itself. Imagine the soul before it comes down into a body, pure soul. And the soul is told, got to come down into a body. How does the soul feel? A downgrade. Here I am, a pure, disembodied, unembodied, unencumbered soul. I'm a spirit, a free spirit, divine spirit, basking in divine rays. And now you want me to go into a body, into a physical world full of challenges and complications? I don't want to do that. Yeah. The soul above is like the angel. Yeah. The soul says, I don't want to do that. Now, it's not really given a choice. Pirkei Avot, it says, ethics of our father, it says, Bal karcha atachai, against your will, you were born. Your life is not. The soul, on some level, would rather be in a pristine place. And yet, the soul is sent down. Picture, it's not what happens, but just picture, going to the elevator, pressing it down, right? You're going down like 50 floors. Ay, Gewalt, it seems like it's terrible for the soul. And yet, we know that the experience of going down is actually the greatest experience for the soul. The soul gains so much from its sojourn, from its time on earth. It gains so much from its experience on earth, to the point that ultimately, when our mission culminates, when our mission concludes, it's difficult for the soul to leave the body, even though its mission has been fulfilled. Which means that even though initially it was apprehensive about its descent, ultimately it recognizes the growth that happens through descent. The same idea is in language. We have an idea, it's in our heads. Brilliant, I have a brilliant idea. And then I put it into language. And then I take the words, imperfect words, because I could have used different words. I don't know why I use these words. I take these words and deliver it to someone else. I speak it to someone else. Ay, what a descent, how the mighty have fallen. The idea was perfect, unencumbered. No one challenged it. Now I tell it, now someone says you're wrong. Ay, so vulnerable. It was perfect before, and look what I've done to it. It's the greatest experience. Taking something and bringing it down is very often the greatest experience. Life itself is a product of taking the soul and bringing it down. And although at first it feels difficult or even traumatic for the soul, ultimately it's the greatest blessing. All right, let's read this inside. These are some really, really powerful ideas in Kabbalah and Hasidic philosophy. And I'm just really super excited to share them with you. Thank you. To share them with you this morning. And we're going to read this together. We're going to study together. I'll tell you, and I'll put it up on the screen as well. We are on page, give me a quick second. We're on page, hold on, 36. Oh, what a good Jewish number. Page 36. You might have to flip around a little bit and turn things upside down to find it. It's like double-sided, double column, type of printout. But hopefully it is showing up.
Getting that, I'll tell you one.
Yeah.
So Rav Soloveitchik
Yeah.
gave a definition. How do you know if it's lashon hara?
Yeah.
He said, if you enjoy talking about
I'm going to repeat that. Rabbi Soloveitchik once said, how do you know when something's lashon hara, gossip? If if it feels good, if it's exciting to talk about. If it's a little too juicy, then it might be a problem. All right, I'm sharing my screen. That's great. Sharing my screen, and let's jump in. Good morning. Good morning. Oh, perfect timing. Just about to read inside. All right. Great. All right, this is 36, where it says the rationale. This is like some of the biggest ideas in Kabbalah and Hasidic philosophy are captured right here, right now. Let me check in. Ellen, good to see you. Ellen, can you see, is it coming up on the screen? This is for everybody. Yes, does it? Yeah, Alex, someone give me a thumbs up. Can you guys see it on the screen? Yes, okay, great. All right, here we go. In summary, and this is, of course, what we've been discussing in this text and previous pages, but we'll pick it up from right here. In summary, speech causes the light of the intellect's depth and profundity to shine and be revealed. A revelation that is not produced by the exploration of thought alone. In other words, when you were just thinking about something, you didn't have the profundity of thought as you did when you shared it in language, in speech. Let's continue inside. In speech, language, the length and the width of the intellect and the manner in which it is revealed are far superior to the mode of revelation within the intellect itself. So there's a limit to how much you can think of an idea on your own. There's a limit to how far your mind will expand in itself. But when you take the idea and you drop it into speech and understand, I know I've said this many times this morning, I use the word imperfect, and there's a reason why I use that word, why I use that word imperfect. When you have an idea, you can communicate it in any number of ways. Think about it. If you want to write a book, right? You want to write a children's book, or you want to write you want to convey a theme. How many ways can you write that book? 1,000 ways, 1,000,000 ways. It's like an infinite number of ways in which you can share an idea creatively. It's any number of ways. And that's only through writing, let alone through song, poetry, which is also writing, I guess, art, right? There's so many different ways to communicate. Language is not just, not limited to one manner of language. It's so open-ended as to how we can communicate and we can articulate. So all speech or all language is imperfect in the sense that there might have been a better way to do it. And yet, this is the way that was chosen. Let's continue. Last sentence of that paragraph right after the caption, the rationale, or that head of the rationale. And in the realm of emotions, he says, speech causes a great increase of excitement. Same thing is true with emotions. The way you feel something inside pales in comparison to the way you feel about it after you've shared it with someone else. You feel love, and then you speak about your love. Oh, now you really feel the love. You feel upset, then you start speaking about your upsetness. Now you really feel upset. Speech magnifies ideas. Speech magnifies emotions. Here we go. The reason for all this. This is like after a major drum roll of, I don't know, a half a dozen to a dozen pages. The reason for all this is the lofty nature of speech in its source, which transcends even the source and origin of intellect. Let's break down that sentence. He says that speech, i.e. language, comes from spiritually a higher place than intellect itself. Ideas are here, and again, it's not how it works. It's not like you don't stack things spiritually, but I'm just using my hands because that's all I got right now, right? Intellect is from here. Speech is from here. Way higher. Huh?
Words came first.
Words came first. Words came first, and words represent the transcendence of particulars. Let's continue. Indeed, the letters of language stem from Keter, which transcends Chachma. He's using mystical language. I'll explain very quickly. Chachma, of course, is the origin, is the first ability of intelligence. Chachma is intelligence. Keter, Chachma means wisdom. Keter means crown. Think about a literal crown. A literal crown goes above the head. The head is the seat of the intelligence. The head is where we think. And yet a crown is even on top of that. So a crown is like, oh, you think you're intelligent? Oh, look at the crown. The crown's even higher. What's the crown spiritually? Language. Intelligence is in the head. And what's the crown? Language. Language is the crown. Language is something we do because we're bored. No, Language is the crown. Language is higher than Chachma. Let's continue. And that's the way it is spiritually in the cosmos. And as far as its position in the soul, listen to this. Language, speech, is at the level of the essence of the soul, which transcends the soul's power of Chachma. So the soul, as I said, I wrote in the email last night, as well as I mentioned earlier today, every ability comes from the soul. Human ability comes from the fact that we can see comes from the soul. The fact that we can hear, that comes from the soul. All human ability comes from the soul. The ability to think and to know comes from the soul. What do we call that soul power? Chachma. But the ability to speak, that doesn't come from Chachma. That comes from the essence of the soul, the core of the soul. Let's continue. Therefore, the letters of speech compel the koach hamaskil. That means the generative power of ideas to be revealed, so that even that which it is unable to reveal on its own is revealed by force of the letters of speech. Let me just break this down into simple language. There is a fountain of intelligence in our soul that spawns intelligence, ideas. But speech is from language is from a higher place in the soul than even that source, that fountain of ideas. And so the big idea here is that when we speak out an idea, we force new ideas into that idea. We actually compel more breadth, width, and depth of the idea into existence. So if you keep an idea in your head, you understand it only on one level. But when you speak it out, you understand that on a much deeper level, because you're forcing new ideas into existence in a good way through the power of speech. Okay, so again, what we've seen here is something quite puzzling. It's one of the ultimate paradoxes. And that is when you take something that seems to be above something else and you put it into the lower thing, the higher thing gets enhanced. Makes no sense. It's like, it's like I'm giving to you, I'm doing you a favor, I'm giving to you, and I get enhanced. It doesn't make any sense. We know this is true, right? We know this is true with tzedakah. When we give, we get more than we give. But it doesn't seem to make sense. It doesn't seem to make sense mechanically. If you have an idea and you put it into speech, the idea shouldn't be enhanced. The idea is now just, is transmitted. But yet when you move something downward, that process of going down actually brings the thing that was compelled down, it actually brings it up. And he says this is true in all forms of light, all spiritual light. And this is an unbelievable idea. Let's continue inside. The upward impulse. And we're also going to get into the nature of fire, which is perfect for Hanukkah, which is beginning tonight. All right, the upward impulse. We can explain this, the puzzling paradox of how ideas are enhanced through speech. We can explain this by introducing a puzzling concept. The phenomenon of the effusion and descent of light, i.e. its descent, and we're now on page 37, its manifestation into vessels and letters seems astonishing, considering that it runs contrary to the nature of light. Now, we're not speaking about physical light. We're speaking about spiritual light, or the spiritual concept of energy and light that moves downward. And he says that seems astonishing because light by nature, spiritual light, should be moving upward, not downward. As he says in the next line in 37, second line, for the nature of light is to ascend upward, to cleave to and merge into its source. And so now he's about to state a general rule in when it comes to light and energy, and that is everything that senses its source wants to ascend higher and not descend lower. In other words, if there's some sort of magnetic force, right, really magnetic force that is like above you, you're going to naturally tend, I guess, toward that thing to go back up to that space. That's what you're going to want. You're going to want to go to that space. The example that he's going to give is the example of fire. When you have a big bonfire, right? You have a big fire, and then you take a candle and you hold it toward the candle. What happens, you take the candle, you hold it toward the big bonfire. What happens is the light of the individual flame naturally leans in toward the bigger flame, to the bigger fire. So he says, the little fire, huh?
Probably have to be close.
Yeah, it's not going to jump across the room. That's where we get David Copperfield involved. But when you get close enough and it senses the larger light, it leans into that larger light to become subsumed within the larger light. In general, a thing is drawn after its source. A thing is drawn after something greater than self. By the way, this is human nature in general. In human nature, human beings are naturally drawn toward causes greater than self. Right? Think about great revolutions. Great revolutions are very magnetic. People want to be involved in something bigger. People want to be involved in something revolutionary. That's why I always say that Judaism, like we lost the plot. Judaism is the greatest revolution. Abraham was a revolutionary. He was a counterculturist. We had that whole revolutionary thing going, and now it's like status quo. We got to remember our origins. We're edgy. Judaism is edgy. Let's lean into it. But the point is, people like something greater than self. He says the nature of light is the same. The nature of light is to always go up and cleave to something greater than itself, to cleave to its source. Which again, he's developing a question, which begs the question: why is it that why light descends downward into the next level of existence as opposed to returning back up to its source? Let's continue 37, where it says cause and effect. We're going to go through some pretty deep ideas here. It is well known that every drawing forth of light, even its initial emergence from the luminary, is a revelation of the hidden, not the creation of a new being, and essentially a case of cause and effect. I'll explain this right now. The Hebrew for cause and effect is Ilah va'alul. Ilah va'alul. Ilah va'alul is translated as cause and effect, and it means that something is generating something else. This cause is generating that effect. Okay, that's how it works. You have this cause and that effect. So, for example, good example of cause and effect are thoughts and feelings, or ideas and emotions. So you're thinking about something, and then you develop an emotion for it. It's a natural repercussion. It's a natural outcome. You have an idea, you have an emotion, and the two are interrelated. So, for example, let's say you're thinking about how nice someone was to you. They did, it was a difficult time, and they did the most incredible act of kindness to you that really, really touched you. How are you going to feel about it? You're going to feel a love or a sense of gratitude toward them because you were in a difficult time and they did something so kind. You're going to feel an overwhelming sense of love and appreciation for them. The emotion is generated by the idea or by the awareness. Awareness generates emotions. That's the way it works. Ideas generate feelings. By nature, one is the cause and one is the effect. By nature, cause and effect, the effect senses the cause and always leans back toward its cause. So the emotion that's generated by an idea, that emotion is close to the idea, and also it leans back in toward that idea. So let's continue inside. The nature, this is under the caption cause and effect, under the header cause and effect, this is the fourth line. The nature of cause and effect is such that the impulse of the effect is to cleave to its cause. For in every instance of cause and effect, the two must be in each other's realm. In other words, the two are relatable, the two are relative to each other. Hence, the effect is conscious of its cause and therefore longs to cleave to it and does not wish to distance itself from it by descending downward. When you know that you're coming from such and such origin, all you want is to remain close to that cause, to that source, and not go further away. You want to go kind of lean back into where you come from, where your comfort zone is. That's by nature. And he's speaking about realities that are in our experience in a very theoretical and mystical way, and so it's a little bit what's the word I'm looking for? Philosophical. But he's about to bring this into a physical example. Okay, here we go. the dancing flame. Let's continue. This is where we get a nice Hanukkah message as well. This idea is expressed in the verse, for the Lord your God is a consuming fire. So the verse, let's see what this verse is from. This verse is from Devarim, Deuteronomy 4:24, okay? So it says, the Lord your God is a consuming fire. So that verse compares godliness to fire. What's the connection? For just as the nature of fire is to ascend upward, so too godly light is constantly in a state, let's turn to 38, it's constantly in a state of ascent, rising from one elevation to the next within his essence, and it does not wish to descend below. In the same way, every spiritual being is constantly in a state of ascent. So let's hone in on the physical example, because that's the best way that we can develop this thought. So imagine you're holding a Hanukkah candle, which we'll have the opportunity to hold that tonight. You might have a menorah with candles, with wax candles. You might have a menorah with beeswax candles. You might have a menorah with oil lamps. But either way, once it's lit, there will be a flame. I'm not suggesting you try this with an oil lamp, because that's going to get messy. But imagine you take a candle, and I'm going to use my spoon here as a, where's the other part of that spoon? I don't even want to know. All right. Maybe it's liquefied. I don't. Yeah, apparently. It's not my first time using this as an example for a flame. Anyway, so imagine this is the candle. And this is the flame right here. Okay? Imagine you take the candle and you turn it sideways. You know what's going to happen? The flame is going to point up. It always points up. And the mystics, although it's not fully developed here, the Kabbalists point this out. And they find this to be very interesting. Whenever you're holding a candle, whenever you're holding a flame, essentially, no matter how you tilt it, it's always going to go up. In fact, and again, please do not try this at home. If you take the candle and hold it upside down, you know what's going to happen? You're going to get burned. God forbid, right? Because the flame is going to go straight up. And we know this to be true. Sometimes you put out a Havdalah candle, and you're trying to pull it out, and it's a little too short, and you bend it a little too much. Next thing you know, you're feeling the heat a little bit. You're like, "Ay, I gotta work on my Havdalah candle extinguishing technique, because it's getting a little too hot for comfort." The point is, fire always trends upward. No matter how you put it, no matter what angle, it always goes up. According to Kabbalah, according to the mystics, the reason for this is because fire, unlike anything else in existence, fire most acutely senses its source above, its divine source above, and constantly strives to connect with that source. Okay, so here's a quick primer in existence. Everything in existence wants to promote its own existence. It wants to be more. So I'm sure this ties into Darwinian ideas of evolution and survival of the fittest, but a thing that exists wants to stabilize its existence and exist more by nature. Things want to be and want to be more. So we eat, we protect ourselves, we fight back when we feel threatened. All of the above is because we just simply want to be, and we want to make sure that our being is as secure as possible. There's one exception. I recently wrote an article about this. There's one exception. The exception to this is fire. Fire is the only thing that simply does not want to be. It doesn't want to be. How do I know this? Because when you take fire and you attach it to something, what does it do? Burns it. Why? You know what's going to happen? What happens when fire burns what it's on? And it burns everything. What's going to happen? It goes out. You know what fire really wants? It wants to go out. That's why it's always leaning upward. It doesn't want to be. Everything else wants to be. Everything else loves the gravitational pull downward. Everything else wants to be wants to hold on to its existence. Fire is the only thing in creation, the only element on this earth that doesn't want to be. It, in fact, precisely wants to get out of here. It wants an exit strategy. We think.
We have a concept of Rasa B'Shuv.
throughout nature of wanting to go up and come back down?
There is a little bit of that sense of yearning and then returning, but most powerfully, we see this with fire. That fire is through and through in that state of yearning above. We see this with the idea of Ratzav Ashur, the idea of that escape and then return is really initially stated with regard to the angels. The angels who the angels would be like fire, the angels on that level. Our soul also has that element of rush and return. It says that the divine energy in creation also pulses, like the heartbeat pulses back and forth, back and forth. But those are the spiritual parts. The more physical part of existence wants to maintain its existence. It wants to be. It wants to solidify its isness. It wants to solidify its beingness as opposed to giving up its being. The only element, and there are four elements classically: fire, air, earth, and water. The only one of those four elements that lifts up. The only one, I mean, air is a little bit ethereal, but it's still not the same as fire. Fire is not just ethereal. Fire it's actively escaping. Fire is restless. Fire is actively escaping. And again, just to clarify my point of what its destructiveness tells us, it's not destructive for the sake of being destructive. It's destructive because it's trying to get out of here. And you're trying to hold it back with something else. And it says, I don't want to be here. The only way out is by burning up everything. And then there's nothing left to hold me. Then I can get out of here. There's fire left to its own devices would on its own blip out of existence. That's what fire would do. That's why no matter where you turn it, it's always going up. Fire doesn't want to be here. Fire wants to be out. And yet, we hold the fire down. We almost force it into being. By the way, fire is also forced into being in the first place. You strike something to produce fire. It's almost like it's a miracle of like forcing something that doesn't want to be here into existence. And then you have to do everything in your power to hold it down before it goes up, before it goes out. Fire is the most, what's the word I'm looking for? Not vulnerable, the most, not susceptible. Fire is not transient, whatever. Fire is precarious. Fire is the most precarious thing in existence on a physical level. So precarious. It doesn't want to be here. We think of fire as something that wants to announce its presence. It doesn't. It wants to get out of here. And Nebuch, you're holding it back with something else. It says, okay, let me do what I want to that thing. I want to undo myself. So let me undo that. Then I can be undone. Fire wants to undo reality. So if we consider creation to be the process of taking nothingness and making it to somethingness, then fire wants to take somethingness and make it back and turn it back into nothingness. The soul that we have is the same. The soul that we have is the same. It's just like fire. The soul is a piece of God. The soul senses God. The soul wants to go back to its source. The soul by nature wants to go back up. It wants to go up to its source. But it's sent down, as we said before, it's sent down against its will. It's forced into being sent down here. And then it's being held by the body until the body is no longer strong enough to hold it. And then the grip loosens, and then the soul goes back to its source. That's the cycle of life. The soul is sent into the body is gripping it, and when the body loses its grip, which we believe happens when the human mission is done, then the soul naturally ascends back up to its source. Let's just jump back inside and let's read some of this in our text, and then we'll close it out in the next 3 or 4 minutes, and we will share a final Hanukkah message as well. All right, so back inside. The yearning soul, 38. Everything that I told you now is captured in one way or another in these paragraphs right here. The yearning soul, again, page 38. Consider earthly man, for example, whose soul's nature is likewise to soar upward. As the verse referring to the soul's love of God states, her coals are coals of fire, the flame of God. That's referring to the soul's love of God. Just as the flame constantly soars upward, as I mentioned before, so too the soul is constantly in a state of upward striving. Like the fire, like your little flame that always points up, the soul inside of us, of you and I, always wants to go back to its source. And he says this is the opposite of the body's nature, which drags downward and is in a state of descent below. The body by nature wants to lean in. It's like those skiers. You ever see the skiers before they go down the hill? They get really low to the ground. The body is always like leaning into earthliness. I want to eat more. I want to live more. I want to attach more. I want to hold on to the stuff around me. When things get shaky, the body's tendency is to hold on to the stuff. The more grounded, the better. The soul says, let me turn to God. The body says, let me hold on to the earth. Two different realities, two different personas, two different perspectives. And by the way, this is not a judgment. It's a fact. It's the way God created it. The body's nature is to lean in below. The soul's nature is to soar like a flame. So let's continue this. As in the verse, the spirit of man, that's the soul, ascends upward, while the spirit of the animal, that's the body, descends downward, because we each have an animal spirit and a loftier human spirit. So that's the soul and the body. The soul with humankind ascends up like the fire. The body, the animal, the lower instinct descends below. And he actually says that right here. For the spirit of man, referring to man's godly soul, which is called man, is in a state of ascent, while the spirit of the animal, the body and animal soul, is in a state of descent. So let's close it out here. Very powerful idea. And I want to just quickly summarize what we said. We started today by talking about language, spending a lot of time talking about the origin of language, the way scientists and sociologists talk about language, the way Torah talks about language, the uniqueness of Hebrew as the holy tongue, as the code of the universe, as the origin, not only the origin, the code, the core of language, where it's not just that things are named in Hebrew because we've associated that with that, but rather it's a deep soul association. It's a deep spiritual association. So we spoke about language on that level. Then we spoke about the origin of language in the soul. And we explained, using our text as well, that when it comes to language, you have ideas, and then, because what are you speaking about? You're speaking about ideas. So you have your idea, and then you put it into language. So there's two elements. There's the idea, the concept, and then there's the container, or the structure of language that you're using to convey it to someone else. And it would seem clear and obvious to anybody that the idea is much higher, is much loftier, is much far superior to the actual language itself. But in Kabbalah, it's the opposite. The idea is chachma, intelligence. The language is keter, is the crown on top of that. Language is your ability to transcend self. Language is your ability to really connect with another soul. And that's higher than your own soul. So chachma, wisdom, is your wisdom. Language touches the universality of souls. And that comes from keter, or as he says, from the essence of the soul. So again, in short, when you take an idea and you put it into words and then convey it to someone else, that's not a descent. That's really an ascent. We're looking at the world almost through an opposite mirror. Instead of us thinking that it's a descent, I have to now take my ideas, my brilliant ideas, and package them into language and then share them with someone else who's probably not going to understand the way I meant it. Instead of thinking of language in a begrudging fashion, let's recognize the power of language to elevate, not just to bring people together, but to elevate ourselves. Our own ideas become magnified and sharper through language, as we were discussing. Our own feelings become magnified and more attuned, more intensely felt when we speak about them. And this led us into this final conversation that we talked about today, which is about the fire of the soul and the container of the body. Everything by nature, if something is spiritual by nature, wants to go up. And yet, if it comes down, there's only one reason. It's not just because it's forced to come down. It's because, and this is the big reveal, which I haven't yet shared, but it follows the discussion about ideas and words. When the soul comes down, maybe I did share it. When the soul comes down, it actually rises higher than it was before. And this is, once again, the great paradox of life, the great paradox of Kabbalah, or the illumination of the paradox. That which seems to be going down is actually going up. It only looks like it's going down to our distorted view, but it's really going up. When the soul comes down into a body, and it seems like the soul doesn't want to, and the body is flawed, and it's frail, and it's, this world is such a difficult place. The fact that it's going down indicates that it's not actually going down. It must be an ascent. Just like when we take an idea and put it into words, it's not a descent because the language is actually higher than the idea. The same thing is true with the soul. The same thing is true with life. So as we prepare to light our menorahs tonight for the first time in a year, Hanukkah is such a beautiful holiday. Who doesn't love Hanukkah? It's a great time of year for various reasons, right? Hopefully everyone's in a good mood. It's so evocative, so many powerful memories of Hanukkah, and we can really connect with loved ones, both here and not here, in such a powerful way. And as we prepare to light our menorahs, let's think about fire as the analogy of soul, and how the fire that we're bringing into existence and that we're lighting our menorahs, we're creating fire. It's really about the process of taking something ethereal, something otherworldly, and manifesting it and bring it into the space. And that seems like a great descent. We're pulling it against its will down. We're putting oil or putting paraffin or beeswax, and we're pulling a fire against its will into existence until it can finally let go. And although that seems like a descent, and that's how it was set up, that's only because we didn't read the punchline inside, which we will next time. The punchline is that the descent of the soul, the descent of the fire, is actually the greatest thing. It's actually a beautiful thing because it's through that descent that it can illuminate this world. And that's the whole purpose of creation. And so as we light our menorahs tonight, let us remember that it's not the easy things that make a difference, it's the hard things. It's the hard things that make a difference. It's those things that run contrary to our nature, whether it's our physical nature or our spiritual nature, that really make a difference on earth. And let us commit this Hanukkah to truly investing ourselves, not in escaping this world, but in investing into making this world brighter and warmer for us all. Thank you for joining me this morning for Kabbalah Cafe. And I look forward to picking it up next time. Speaking of next time, I am out of town next Sunday. The following Sunday is January 1st, which is New Year's. So we're likely not going to meet then. So let's plan to pick this up in, is it 3 weeks from today? 3 weeks from today. The following, I guess it would be January 8th. So we'll pick it up then. Same bad time, same bad channel with the same or even better breakfast if you join us here in person. And it is great to see everyone. Thank you for coming. Hope you enjoyed it. And I'll stick around for questions or comments or discussion if you wish.
Thank you very much, Sollish.
Pleasure.
Rabbi?
Bad language in use today.
Yeah.
In every television, movies, on the street. But my theory on that is everything going on in the last 50 years is really against anything that's in the Torah, anything that's anti-religion. This is the Bible, they don't want it. So what does the Bible say about language?
It's holy.
Oh.
Yeah.
So we have to degrade it.
Yeah. Got to schlep it down.
I think take it down.
Because that's how you make your point. Like we're not pro this. Powerful.
You take all these movements and you look at them, you break it down, and you say, what's in common with this movement and that movement? And you see that most of them is anything that's anti-Bible.
Interesting. All right. Well, we got to reverse the trend. We got to reverse the trend and bring light into this world. That's the idea. Pleasure. Thanks for being here.
Rabbi, I noticed that it's often said that when a student has to make a presentation or give a talk, the one that learns the most from the talk is the one that actually is making the presentation.
Yes, exactly. It's like the soul. The soul learns the most when it has to come down into this body. The soul above, unencumbered or not encumbered by the body. The soul learns whatever it learns, but when it comes down here, it learns the most. It experiences the most. Definitely a colorful experience. But thanks for sharing that. It's true, 100% true. It's a tremendous growth experience to share, to put ideas into language, to put yourself out there and connect with others. It's a tremendously growing experience. It reminds me of the joke that they tell about this philosopher who this guy sees his buddy after years. He knows he's a philosopher. He hasn't seen him in 20 years. He says, Jim, what you been up to? He's like, I've been pondering the meaning of life for 20 years. He says, wow, and what'd you discover? He says, I've discovered that life is a bridge. And so his friend says, so what do you mean by that? He says, you know what? Good question. Maybe it's not a bridge. So like we gain, yes, you can learn a lot in isolation, but we learn the most with collaboration. And we know this to be true. The greatest advancements on any level, societal level, technological level, medical level, happens when there is collaboration and communication. In fact, it's when there's not only collaboration, but when there's collaboration with those that you would never expect to be helped with collaboration. It's when the engineer speaks with the mathematician, who speaks to the scientist, who speaks to the, it's when you have like different fields communicating that really you have the greatest advancements. It's kind of like the way real growth happens. So the idea of communication and sharing, collaborating, we know its power. It's so much easier to just stay within. That's like the soul staying in heaven. There's much more gained with that experience of opening up.
Rabbi, I know today, we spoke about speech, but could the same thing be said for articulating the idea into the formation of the letters, i.e. the writing? Can that accomplish the same thing?
Same thing. The idea is to take something in your head or something in your heart and to put it into language. 100%. Writing would be the same thing. Music would be the same thing. Dance would be the same thing. The idea is taking something inside and creating an expression of it. That expression we call language, and it's very Ellen, jump in.
Yeah, well, sometimes it is so difficult to find the perfect word to convey what we really mean.
Yes.
I mean, even to tell in a way of telling someone dear to you that you love them, it's difficult to find, just to say I love you, but to find the real words to tell you what the person means to you.
Yes.
And even in writing, so when I sit down to write, to find the right word to say what I really want to say.
It's hard.
It's difficult.
Taking something inside and putting it outside, right? And that's where the power lies. Hold on, give me 1 second. No. No. I need to ask you this for the class, when it's happening in the topics. Is that okay? And there's an email in the class. Yes. Can I get your email just super fast? That way I make sure that happens. And then I'll just add this where I send out one email a week, let me know like if it's happening, it's not happening, you know that. I know the feeling. It was great to see you. Thank you very much for coming. All right. I am back.
Well, what I wanted to say was I can hear the words perfectly in my head.
Yeah.
Exactly what I want to say is in my head. But when I want to write it or I want to speak it, I lost the word. I don't have, it's gone. I have to
I will tell
completely
you,
think it in order to write it or say it.
what I think is interesting about this conversation, and I might be wrong. So I don't know that I feel like super definitively strong about this, but I feel like the power of speech lies not in its perfection, but in the process. In other words, there is a struggle to find the right words for an idea or a feeling. And it can be very frustrating to put it into something. And I use this, and I'm sure you heard me say this before multiple times today. It's to put it in an imperfect container. It's like, oh yeah, I had such a big idea, and this container is so imperfect. I don't like this imperfection. And yet, despite the imperfection, it's not about the perfection, it's about the process, the actual process of taking something and putting it, squeezing it into a space that's not as perfect as seemingly perfect as where it came from. That itself is what lifts up the experience to be a transcendent experience. So I would say like this: the effort is real, the struggle is real, and it's because of that it actually leads to a greater awareness, a greater knowledge, a greater feeling of the emotions. It's because of that. Imagine the soul, the frustration of the soul. Here there's perfection, and I have to squeeze myself into a flawed body, a frail, relatively frail, weak, temporal, physical body. Gewalt, right? Right? My back. I mean, the soul doesn't have any pain, and the body is like, my back, my fingers, right? So gesund, right? By the way, feel better. Refuah shlema. Speaking of the body, right? I mean, it's like the body's got. So think about how your frustration or struggle with finding the right words is like the soul finding the right body. And at some point, the soul says, "It is what it is. I got what I got. Got to do the best with what we got." And but it's not just. I would say it's not just a. So what I'm looking for, it's not just a concession. It's actually an elevation. That's the big idea. So the big idea, what we're going, and this is one of the foundational, like, big ideas of Kabbalah, that oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, what appears to be a descent is actually an ascent. What seems to be a degrading experience or a difficult experience is actually the greatest experience possible. So that's the big idea today. Dr. Maxey, great to see you.
Okay.
How's everything?
Thank you. Good to see you as well.
Good. Andrea, good to see you. It's good seeing you last week in person. Great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Pleasure. And Maritza, great to have you here with us as well. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
How long do you plan on having this Kabbalah class go on? Is it going to just be, you're going to go on and on and on?
Well,
or
I'm
is it,
thinking about 20 years plus.
okay.
Yeah, no. I'm all joking aside. Yeah, it'll be a consistent. Please God, it'll be a consistent every week Sunday thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I am leaving Atlanta for a few months, and I'll try to follow it on Zoom, and then hopefully when I come back, I hope to.
Absolutely, we'll be here. We'll definitely be here. And what I'll do, because we were corresponding via email, I will send you also a link where you can listen to the recordings of the class. So if you can't get us live on Zoom for whatever reason, you can listen to them anytime and catch up at your leisure. You just click on the button and you can listen to a class and enjoy it.
Okay.
All right, great. All right, happy Hanukkah, everyone. Happy first
Good
night.
same
It's
to you.
so special. It's like always.
Happy Hanukkah.
Hi,
Enjoy. Take care. We'll see you guys.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.